Riley is sitting on a curb in front of a rehab facility, waiting for her mother to come by and pick her up. Scrolling through her phone, which was just recently returned to her, she goes through her feed, which is concentrated around the problems of body image and diet. From the way body images flash through her mind, we get a glimpse into what kind of problem she is going through. Finally, to add to it all, she comes up with a picture of Hunter, seemingly her ex-boyfriend. He's standing with another girl in this picture, and he seems so happy that Riley suddenly feels extremely vulnerable. Repeating over and over to herself not to call him, her fingers riot against her consciousness. Once the call starts, however, the phone is thrown far away. There is no wonder why her phone was taken away from her at the rehabilitation center. When Riley gets her crushed phone back, Casey finally drives by. Two girls embrace one another and drive back to the city, where Riley's life is supposed to resume on a lighter note. In contrast with this idea, Casey dares her to do something challenging immediately. There is a party planned for tonight at their common friend's place, and they could go. Naturally, Riley doesn't want to go, but her best friend pleads with her so much that she finds herself unable to resist. There is karaoke at the party, and people dance and sing. At one point, only Riley and one young man are left sitting by the corner, while other people sing their minds out. The name of this young man is Ethan, and he seems to be quite an interesting person. After catching a glimpse of Ryle, he quickly decides to speak with her, and the two quickly hit it off. Thanks to Ethan's witty jokes and funnily exaggerated stories that can only partly be true, Riley finds herself weirdly drawn by him. Talking to him seems to be the only thing enjoyable at this party. But this ends when suddenly, Ethan catches a glimpse of somebody and abruptly decides to leave. The person must be connected to the past that he's trying to forget, so there is no wonder why he wants to go as quickly as possible. At the same time, he doesn't want to leave Riley, so he offers to take her to a Thai place nearby. According to the rehabilitation program, Riley isn't allowed to date, but she is still quick to agree without any second thought. The chemistry between them is much more evident in the next scene, when they eat together at a Thai place. The truth, jokes, and mysteries are comically entangled with one another in their conversation, and they are so in tune with one another that the flow of communication never stops. Riley finds herself in an incredibly well-adjusted psychological atmosphere here, but suddenly the subject of her therapies is slithered into the dialogue, and she fails to joke about it. Feeling her heartbeat faster, and sensing that she is inevitably going to soon lose control over her body and mind, she excuses herself and walks over to the bathroom. There, she rolls up her shirt and, breathing heavily, starts observing her figure. Anxious, she takes out her phone as well, and as if she were getting a necessary dose to calm herself down, she listens to a voicemail where some man's voice expresses love. Thankfully, after this episode, she doesn't decide to run away. Instead, we see her walking together with Ethan in the next scene. Once they finally reach the foot of her building, thoughts are somewhat scattered in Riley's mind, but the girl still manages to keep herself together and come up with a relatively reasonable explanation as to why they cannot have sex today. She wishes for him to come up. She truly does, but if their relationship takes a step forward tonight, it might cause some problems for her. She admits that she's been recently let out of rehab as well, and listening to her, nervously trying to explain herself, Ethan calmly stresses that he doesn't have to come up. It is expected that here, the two will say a warm goodbye and decide when to meet again on a friendly note. But in contrast to this, we see them entangled with one another, kissing and getting in her apartment. To be more specific, in the minds of this passionate episode, only Ethan is getting naked, and once there is nothing more in his body to take off, he lifts up Riley's shirt and touches her belly. This is when fires are set out abruptly. The girl backs away, covers up her face, and draws back in herself, leaving the man awkwardly standing in the middle of the living room. Many apologies are given as the young man puts his clothes back on. Easily, they manage to brush off the uncomfortableness fairly quickly and decide to do something else together. As it turns out, Ethan is a pretty skilled designer of cushy houses. By creating a tent with pillows and blankets, he creates a comfortable, warm space that resembles the warm atmosphere of their relationship. And laying there, Riley feels unusually secure enough to speak about her problems. And so, this is when she shares almost everything with Ethan about her mental issues. As it turns out, she's been having problems with eating and body image. Still anxious, she indicates that her condition created serious dangers to her health and well-being, and it all went to a point where it was a life or death situation. This is why she decided to participate in the rehab program. Ethan listens to her actively. Smartly and empathetically, he points out in the end that she should be proud of her decision to fight rather than ashamed of what she had to go through. This conversation, more than anything, draws the two personalities together. Going outside on the balcony that overlooks the city landscape, Ethan expresses that he likes her. Realizing that her own image of herself isn't the only and most trustworthy one that there is, she embraces him and makes out. The two try getting once more. Unfortunately, the second attempt ends up being unsuccessful as well. Riley's body seems to know that she isn't supposed to be doing this, so the two will have to put on their clothes once more and get downstairs to watch a movie. Even though this situation might be off-putting for many, this duo realizes that both have been going through a lot lately. They like each other very much, and it is all right to take things extremely slow. And so, time passes, and the two become great friends. Spending a lot of time together and hanging out every day becomes a tradition, and it all goes to the point where Riley cannot even imagine a day without him. In the next scene, she visits her psychologist. In the beginning of the session, we learn a little more about what is going through her mind. As it turns out, an important component of her disorder is comparison. She constantly compares her body to other women's bodies and believes that she's somewhat inferior. As she stresses, the only reason why others don't feel the same way is because they are beautiful, and she is not. Unfortunately, it cannot be said that the psychologist shows a great deal of empathy here. After giving her a rhetorical question, she gets interested in what she has been doing after therapy. And so, Riley tells her everything about Ethan and the friendship that has been facilitated between them throughout this time. The psychologist knows that the program she is going through strongly discourages new romantic relationships, and even though Riley hasn't explicitly expressed the will to be in a relationship with him, the professional understands that in her heart, she desires to become Ethan's girlfriend. The psychologist tried to discourage her from meeting up with Ethan then, thus creating a kind of atmosphere in the room that makes Riley feel extremely isolated. Feeling tension and resistance, she decides to cut the session short and leave. That evening, she is hired at a dinner theater called Murder in Manhattan. As it turns out, Casey has been working here for a long time, and now the two best friends are co-workers as well. Riley loses her mind over mysteries, criminal stories, and detectives, so there is no doubt she will do a great job. Later that night, Ethan gives her a wonderful and tiny gift. It is a ladybird bracelet, a gentle and subtle gesture. Riley loves it a lot. She knows that it is supposed to change the bracelet she had from rehab, and thus represent the advancement made in her life. That night, while being together inside their blanket house, tension started to grow between them. The development of their relationship seems to be the most natural thing right now. Love, appreciation, acceptance, passion, good friendship. Everything is in place to serve as a strong foundation for a great relationship. But forcefully, the status quo is preserved. The next evening, just before her first day at her new job begins, Riley is introduced to her new co-workers. Everybody seems very nice, but one of them, the barman, makes a comment about his figure quietly. Unfortunately, Riley hears this, and the anxiousness that is created in her mind and body immediately follows her throughout the rest of the day. After getting back home, she checks her belly and tries on some jeans to determine whether she has gotten bigger or smaller. Anxiously, then, she checks the internet and, of course, finds nothing to soothe her anxieties. Everything on her feed promotes self-consciousness about her figure and forces her to compare herself with other women. Finally, getting fed up with all this, she realizes the terrible effect social media has on her. So very quickly she deletes Instagram and looks inside her fridge. Getting the least nutritious food available, she calls Ethan, and from him, she hears something that throws her mind into her past. As it turns out, Ethan met up with his ex-girlfriend today. He still cares about her, but naturally, he has no intention to get back with her. Riley's mind and body have a very strong reaction to this. Seeing the person she's falling in love with meet up with his ex-girlfriend, all her insecurities grow and take on the form of the most terrible predator. Thinking that Ethan decided to move away from her, and the relationship that is moving slowly, Riley avoids speaking with him and quickly, but politely hangs up the phone. She checks the fridge once more, and this is when the traumatic memory comes back to her. In this memory, she is in bed with Hunter, her ex-boyfriend. The young man is sleeping while his phone keeps overflowing with new messages. Suddenly, Riley leans over him, and after checking his phone, she sees something that destroys her psyche. Hunter seems to be cheating on her with another woman, and his phone seems to be filled with pictures of her perfect figure. Riley stands up, completely overtaken by her anxious state. She decides to quiet her mind by eating so that she can silence her feelings. She mixes up everything that is available in her fridge and starts eating uncontrollably. After a few spoons and a lot of tears, she feels terrible about herself and throws things in a trash can, but her mind is immediately thrown back into the same state as before. Kneeling down, she starts eating with her hands from the trash, And this is exactly the moment when Hunter comes out of the bedroom. Naturally, their relationship is over. Remembering this low moment, Riley calls Ethan again and asks him if he could come over. She also requests a frozen yogurt. She hasn't eaten anything today. Ethan immediately realizes what is going on. Keeping quiet for a few seconds, he promises to find something open. Once the call is over, Riley approaches a window in her bathroom. It is evident from her movements and mainly from her gaze that an extremely difficult mental episode is approaching her, drawing back within herself. Her mind starts overflowing with anxious, unhelpful, and trauma-related thoughts, thus changing her perception of herself. Seeing an ugly figure instead of her real body in the mirror, she talks herself down, demeans herself, and marks spots on her own body that she needs to change. Panic conquers her mind, and this irresistible state refuses to go anywhere. Not knowing what to do to herself, she sits on the floor and hears her phone buzz. She checks it immediately and sees a message from the bartender, Max, the one who made a remark about her figure. The man cannot be the best option for her, especially in this situation. But Riley is so vulnerable in this moment that she agrees to go on a date with him. When Ethan finally comes to her, she is crouched inside her bathtub. No words are spoken as the two embrace each other, sharing warmth, and thus putting an end to this frustrating episode. After eating 3 cans of frozen yogurt in the following scene, Riley heads towards the bathroom again, leaving Ethan with his thoughts. Time passes, and Riley unexpectedly starts a relationship with Max. They keep it a secret at work, but naturally, Casey knows everything about it. As any good friend would, she tries to assure Riley that dating Max isn't good for her. To put it very briefly, he is dumb, and having sex with him can only be temporary. Unfortunately, Riley doesn't want to participate in this kind of relationship. Feeling resistance, she prefers to make up an excuse and walk away from Casey. In the next scene, Riley lets Ethan know about the big news. She meets him at a bar and starts her speech by emphasizing the fact that, according to her program, now she is finally allowed to date. Thinking that she will offer to take the next steps in their relationship, Ethan becomes all ears and mildly anxious. But what he hears next crushes his entire reality to pieces. To make everything even worse, Max comes by just in time for the big revelation. Ethan is speechless. He's been waiting for Riley for a very long time, and now he sees her choosing somebody else. The obvious lack of intelligence of this man makes this even worse for Ethan. Once the man goes to grab a drink for himself, Ethan asks Riley about the reasons behind her choice. As a justification, Riley stresses that she thought Ethan was starting to hang out with his ex-girlfriend again. It isn't explicitly said, but the reason Riley chose Max must be that, with him, there is no other woman in the picture. Thus, moving away from Ethan is, in a way, an avoidance of a possible anxious episode. Clearly, Ethan himself fails to understand this in this moment. As if it were a divine intervention, his phone rings very soon, and the person on the other side of the line informs him that his father is drunk and messed up again. This is troubling news, of course, but Ethan must be a tiny bit thankful for it as well. Dashing from the table, he walks out of the bar without even saying goodbye. After the night of taking care of his alcoholic father, Ethan receives a voicemail from Riley, further justifying her decision to start a relationship with Max. The girl stresses that she has a lot in common with him. She also lies that everything is going great in her life, even in regard to her disorder, and asks if she is still invited to his place for the upcoming Thanksgiving. As it turns out, the answer to the latter question is yes. Riley is accepted warmly by Ethan's family in the next scene. The dinner started out delightfully. One joint conversation in which everybody takes part is fun and accepting. But suddenly, everything turns upside down, thanks to Ethan's father. Drunk, he decides to stand up and make a lengthy speech about how great of a family they are and how grateful he is for the past year despite everything. This last part is the most emphasized in his speech. Connecting it with Ethan, the dad stresses that his son fails to be grateful for what he has. Still to this day, he is crying over things he cannot have and things that went wrong in his life, thus making himself pathetic for no good reason. Naturally, this isn't a conversation to be had at Thanksgiving. Catching a glimpse of growing rage and frustration in Ethan's eyes, Riley fails to think of a way to help. Thankfully, so far, Ethan has been able to keep himself together, but soon his father will bring the subject of Riley into his speech as well. He emphasizes that she has a boyfriend and Ethan should let her go. And now the young man fails to contain himself. Exploding in his father's face, he screams at him, and the two engage in a brief but hateful fight. Once silence starts reigning over the dining room, Riley takes her chance to say something. Confused as to what to say first, she says with a shaking voice that she is no longer in a relationship with Max. Embroiled, she tries to leave as politely as possible, then goes outside. When Ethan follows her outside, it is already expected that an extremely meaningful conversation is about to take place. At first, Riley apologizes for not helping enough. She was confused and had no idea what to say. When Ethan gets interested in what happened with Max, she explains that he cheated on her with some models. Remembering this, she abruptly immerses herself in a long session of self-mortification. She is so impossible to be around that not only people keep cheating on her, but even her mom keeps her distance. In her eyes, she is a pathetic, chubby person who's clearly not right in her head. Gradually, the cracks in Ethan's patience begin to grow. Once Riley is done, he underlines the unhelpful behaviors with which she keeps beating herself up. As he becomes more emotional, Ethan stresses that she is much better than Hunter, Max, and some models in Aruba. If only she could look at herself from Ethan's perspective, she could see how perfect she really is. Silence falls when these words are said, and a change in Riley's thought process is painted on her face. This is when Ethan expresses his love for her. This isn't the kind of love they have been expressing this whole time. However, he has loved her since the minute he first saw her, and he just cannot keep watching her do this to herself. Filled with a wide range of emotions, he manages to convert his frustration into love, thus creating a moment that they will always remember. It is hard to describe the magnitude of the warmth that is expressed in this scene, especially in light of recent events. Riley, who's been holding the belief that she's not worthy of true love, clearly sees a person being in love with her from head to toe. And as a happy coincidence, she feels the exact same way towards him. That night, the two try to be intimate for the third time, and even though strugglingly, Riley manages to get through it without cutting it short. The next morning, however, disturbed by her body image once more, she goes downstairs and, before exiting through the door, finds herself unable to resist something. Walking over to the fridge, she finds some food and starts eating it when suddenly, Ethan's father greets him from the kitchen. Immediately, Riley becomes extremely embarrassed, but there is no need to feel bad. The man is the one who should apologize for what happened yesterday. From their morning conversation, it is obvious that Ethan's father hopes he didn't ruin the last night. Before saying goodbye, Riley expresses how she appreciates his family and thus points out that everything is okay. Immediately after exiting through the door, she puts on her earphones, one of the main avoidance mechanisms she implements in her everyday life. Time passes, then. The relationship between Ethan and Riley develops delightfully until, one day, an obstacle presents itself as strongly as ever. During one of the parties, Ethan's best friend proposes to Casey. The answer is yes, and once the celebration starts, Riley finds herself wondering if she will even be in Casey's shoes. Looking over at the people all around her, she begins comparing herself to them once more, and feeling gradually more and more anxious, she leaves the party abruptly. That night, Ethan tries to talk to her. He is ready to listen and to be truly helpful. But in this moment, Riley isn't ready to accept that kind of attitude from anybody. Unfortunately, she does something she later regrets. She pushes him away as hard as she can, thus creating a distance between them. As she says to her therapist in the next scene, Ethan is the only person she can count on. Without him, the only way she can control herself is through social media or other maladaptive behaviors. Believing that her head isn't tuned right, and that her consciousness is, in its crooked nature, self-destructive, she thinks that being with Ethan is the only adaptive way to deal with her mental disorder. Now, however, after the last episode, she isn't so sure that he will ever want to talk to her again. Getting a glimpse of Ethan's perspective on this story, we see him speaking with Justin, his best friend, in the following scene. The two start out their conversation by speaking about the upcoming marriage and gradually move over to discussing Ethan's relationship as well. As it turns out, the man is extremely confused. Riley used to embrace his help, but now she's been drawing further and further away from him, creating distance, and not accepting from him anymore a helping attitude. Justin hates to be the one to tell him this, but he still emphasizes that it isn't his job to help her. He understands how harsh it sounds, but nobody is going to change for Ethan. Urging to start caring for himself, Justin stands up and leaves. The advice that is given to Ethan is clear in this scene. He should break up with Riley and begin concentrating on what's good for him. The next afternoon, after yet another event ends terribly for the dinner theater, Riley decides to use her chance to take a step towards her dream career. She has always wanted to write murder mysteries, and the one that has been playing over and over again in this theater seems extremely simple and unexciting. The owner of both this street and this theater, Bryce, is a wonderful, kind-hearted man who's clearly desperate. When he goes outside to mourn his unsuccessful story, Riley follows him outside and assures him that she can rewrite it, asking for the opportunity. She also underlines that she used to watch murder mysteries with his late father all the time, and she's quite an expert at it. She speaks in such a way that her excitement is transmitted to Bryce as well. The man agrees to give her this promotion, and so Riley gets the job she will undoubtedly enjoy. That evening, after sharing this news with Casey and Justin, she asked about Ethan. The latter's best friend seems to be quite unaware of the social cues his fiancée is giving out, so he spills everything and ruins the night. He says that Ethan has been hanging out with a girl named Gwen, and thus starts out a frustrating episode on the table. Suddenly, after hearing this bad news, Riley starts texting somebody, and seeing that his best friend is going against herself once more, Casey snatches it away from her. As it turns out, Riley was about to text Max and immerse herself in a useless relationship again. Finally, Casey becomes angry, exploding in the face of her best friend. She points out how self-centered she has become, and how she tends to use people to avoid pain. She understands that Riley has real problems, but she also knows that everybody does. The fact that there are difficulties in her life doesn't allow for the attitude she holds. Eventually, before storming out, Casey informs her that she's pregnant. She wanted to tell her, but thanks to her self-centeredness, she was unable to do so. That night, Riley tries her best to quiet her mind. She exercises initially, but then turns to eating once more. When nothing works, she contacts Ethan. The next morning, they meet each other in a hardware shop as friends. Riley offers to go to her place afterwards, but before this offer can be properly rejected, the two run into Hunter and his new girlfriend. It was understandable, out of the bat, that this meeting would eventually cause a great disturbance in Riley's mind. From the outside, the meeting is okay, but the girl is clearly comparing herself to Hunter's new girlfriend. Ethan notices her, flinching her own thigh nervously, and understands just what kind of emotional turmoil is taking place in Riley's insides in this moment. Once it is all over, they choose not to talk about it. To make the day even worse, the duo encounters an unusual situation after getting back to Riley's apartment. The place is being emptied by a group of workers, as if somebody were evicting Riley from her apartment. There is only one person who can do that, her mother, since she is the owner of the place. The woman shows herself quite soon. With a cold, unemotional, and darkly rational attitude, she belittles her daughter and tells her that she doesn't deserve this apartment anymore. Thinking cynically that she's been taking it for granted this whole time, she says that she should quit being a child. It is clear from her evil and depersonalized expressions that she doesn't accept the fact that Riley's having some real psychological difficulties. Before walking away, Ethan tries to stand up for Riley, but realizing how terrible the woman is, he just tells her to go to hell. And so, bitter Ethan and crying Riley leave the apartment together. That evening, the duo drives to Ethan's aunt and uncle's cabin in the woods. The cabin is a delightful place to stay, encompassed by woods. This wooden house is an embodiment of coziness. Being drawn by this warm energy and by the slow dancing outside as shadows lengthen in the woods, Riley decides to discuss the reasons why their relationship didn't work. At first, the explanations that they suggest are extremely vague, aimed at just brushing off this subject. But as Riley reminds him of the love they felt, it all becomes serious. Remembering how genuinely they used to love each other, Riley believes that the reasons they didn't work out aren't important at all. Leaning towards her, she kisses Ethan, but the young man eventually breaks away. To him, there is an enormous boulder in between them, and it needs addressing. He wants it to be addressed right here and now, but the discussion resumes in a way that doesn't promote healthy discussion at all. When Ethan starts explaining why he doesn't want to get back together, he says that he's been going to AI and on meetings, and this turns everything upside down. Thinking that Ethan is trying to get rid of the problems she causes, Riley becomes uncontrollably hostile. Now that they both become angry, the thoughts they were just trying to suppress start bubbling up. Riley points out Ethan's tendency to take care of other people's problems to avoid facing his own. On the other hand, Ethan emphasizes how Riley always acts helpless, as if she were always the main victim of the Earth story. As the duo draw further away from one another, their arguments become meaner and simpler, until there is no possible way back. Storming away, Ethan gets into his car, and Riley dashes into the cabin. Seeing the bottle of tequila, she chugs it up and gets in front of the mirror in the bathroom. Beating herself up, screaming and crying, her soul gets so exhausted from the constant and extremely complicated struggle that she decides to end it all. Checking the bathroom drawers, she uses the first thing that touches her fingers and chugs some more tequila too. Then she just waits. As desperation and fear grow, she takes her phone and listens to a voicemail sent by Casey and Ethan. Their voice and the warmth and appreciation they express reawaken her will to live in her heart. Crawling from the bathtub, she tries to empty her gut while Ethan enters the home. As it turns out, the young man sensed danger and decided to turn around for her. Thankfully, he arrives at the house just in time. Fortunately, Riley was reanimated by the medics. In the next scene, she wakes up in the hospital and hears the voice of her mother. Finally, the mother expresses some warmth towards her daughter, and Riley, after everything that happened, decides to learn how to take care of herself. The conflict between Riley and Casey is also resolved in the following scene. As they embrace one another, all the bitterness that once filled the space between them gives way to warmth and appreciation. As Riley resumes her life, she writes a wonderful crime story and achieves great success in her career. The first time she sees Ethan after the incident is at Casey and Justin's gender reveal party. Ethan appears with his new girlfriend Gwen, and surprisingly enough, Riley doesn't have a strong reaction to it at all. For a while, her being okay with it seems a little conflicting, but soon, we learn why everything is settling this way. Going in the past, we see Ethan bending over Riley's hospital bed, begging her in tears to let him leave. He realizes in this moment that he isn't a good influence for her, that he is standing in the way of her healing process, and he knows exactly what to do. Feeling extreme amounts of sorrow, he pleads with her to understand and leaves the room, thus exiting her life. Once Riley is left alone, she opens her eyes, making it obvious that she's been only pretending to be asleep this whole time. Back in present time, she looks over at him from a distance and sends him a gesture of gratitude. Before one of the final therapy sessions, she turns away from social media and looks out the window. Catching herself feeling peace afterwards, she gets so irritated by the message notification that she throws the phone from the window. The moment is comical, but it shows how Riley is slowly learning to reject some things. As she expresses to her therapist in the final scene, she is finally ready to get better.